Well, as we approach Thanksgiving in just a week or so, we have been looking at this series that we're calling Fading Gratitude. And we've been trying to uncover some of the pitfalls so that we can avoid them of what happens when we allow gratitude to fade from our hearts. If gratitude isn't kept right there in the forefront of our minds, if it begins to fade, it can have some really negative consequences for us. In fact, we saw that in the life of the Israelites, when we look at their history, we see this up and down, up and down, up and down pattern. They're close to God, and then they're worshiping idols. They're enjoying His blessings, and then they have this time of scarcity. They're defeating their enemies, and then their enemies are defeating them. It's just this constant up and down cycle. And we noticed that Asaph, this song leader, this worship leader that King David appointed, that as he gave a summary in Psalm 78 of the history of the Israelites, that he identified what caused that downward slide every time was just those two words: they forgot. They're enjoying the blessings of God, and then they forgot. They began to take it for granted, and gratitude began to fade from their hearts. And as a result of that, there was a slide that took them to a place that they didn't want to go. And so we have been looking at these definitions. This word for forgetful, or this definition for forgetful, is what comes right out of the dictionary. And it's kind of what you would expect it to be: to cease to think of something. I don't think that people choose, at least not healthy people, they don't choose to be ungrateful. I don't think somebody says that, makes a conscious decision. If somebody gives me something or does something for me, I'm purposely not going to say thank you. I'm purposely going to be ungrateful to them. I don't think that most people do that, but I think what is more likely for us is that it just slides out of our memory. We forget. We're not thinking about it anymore. And so to flip this around, we've made our definition for the word gratitude to be something a little bit closer to this, but the opposite direction. Gratitude is to continue to think of someone. That someone is with a capital S, because that someone is God, the one who all of the blessings that have been poured into our life have come from Him. And so we saw last week that one of the pitfalls, one of the dangers of having a lack of gratitude or fading gratitude about what's happened in our past is that we can get stuck there. We have a hard time moving on from that place. But what I want to look at today is I want to move to present tense. Not only does having fading gratitude in the past can keep us stuck, but having fading gratitude in the present can actually just begin to suck life right out of us. I was reminded this week, had kind of a flashback thinking back when I was in college, and my home church in the Detroit area, Brightmoor Tabernacle, had collected a bunch of toys for families that were in need at Christmas time. And it was Christmas Eve, and for some reason, somebody thought that it was a good idea to pick me to hand out all of the toys. And so I drove over to the church, and I had my trunk filled up with all of these unwrapped toys, and I was given a list of just a family name and an address. So I borrowed my dad's real estate maps, and I planned my course so that I could make this route. And I noticed that a lot of the houses that we were going to go to were in some of the rougher neighborhoods in the Detroit area. And so I recruited a couple of friends of mine that were the big, burly guys, and figured I needed a little, some bodyguards there for some of these neighborhoods we were going into. And we would get to a house, and we just had the address. We had no idea how many kids are inside, what their ages were, if they were boys, girls. We didn't know anything. And so when we get to a house, we just go up and knock on the door and tell them who we were and step inside and meet their kids, and then just try to, there's a 12-year-old boy and there's a 7-year-old girl, and then go back out to the car and sort through all the toys and try to figure out, what's the most appropriate ones to bring in. And there were some houses where people were quite grateful for what we brought in, and then there were other houses that we would show up at, and they couldn't care less that we were there. Because they were sitting in front of a TV screen that was far larger than any that we had, and they were playing video games that none of us had, and playing with some toys with some pretty advanced technology, and that certainly wasn't the kind of toys that we had in the trunk of my car to bring in. And so some places, when we brought the toys in, they were kind of like, really? And, you know, it was a little disheartening at times to see that kind of response. Very last house on our list, just kind of the route that I had made using my dad's maps. We pull up at this house, and we came in, I knocked on the door as usual, and came in, and this door, when you came into the house, it was almost halfway between the kitchen on my left and the family room on my right. And so when I stepped inside the door to kind of survey what was going on so we'd know what toys, I looked to my left, and Mom and Dad were working in the kitchen making some food on this Christmas Eve evening. The kitchen table was a fold-up card table with 4 mismatched chairs around it, and it was just paper plates and plastic silverware on the table. Looked to my right into the family room. There was a couple of metal folding chairs. There was a couch with a cinder block brick holding up one corner of it. No TV. Little Charlie Brown Christmas tree in the corner had a couple of simple ornaments on it, but no gifts under the tree. And a couple of kids playing on the floor and on the couch. They were happy. They were enjoying themselves. Mom and Dad told us they had just returned home just a couple of days before. They had an unexpected family emergency that took them out of town. While they were gone, some bad guys backed up a moving truck up their driveway and cleaned them out. They took their Christmas tree. They took all the presents under the tree. They took the clothes in the closet. They took all the furniture. They took all the food on the shelves. The only thing that they left was the food in the refrigerator, the stove, and washer and dryer, and that was it. They cleaned them out. And his family was happy. They were contented. They were enjoying themselves. We walked back out to the car, and I said to these 2 big bodyguard friends that I had with me, I said, guys, we have a lot more toys left than houses that we're going to go to. I think we got to give them a lot more toys. And one of my friends with tears in his eyes said, Craig, we got to give them all of the toys. We're going to bless them with everything that we've got here. And I was thinking about that this week because last week in Psalm 78, we looked at how Asaph told about the Israelites that they had just seen God move in Egypt. He had done these miraculous signs, and finally Pharaoh had let them go. They get to the Red Sea, and God parts the Red Sea so that they can walk through on dry ground. The Egyptians try to follow them, and God closes the sea back up on them. When they get to the other side and realize we're in the desert and we have no drinking water, God cracks open a rock and has fresh drinking water come out for them. And yet still, the Israelites went, well, yeah, God, you did all that, but could you even give us food? I mean, or is that too much for you? And so we looked at last week how God provided manna. Every single day, he gave them food to eat. In fact, Asaph referred to it as the bread of angels. But I want you to see what happened. We're going to pick up the story right where we left it last week in verse number 25. Men ate the bread of angels. He sent them, not just scarcity, but he sent them all the food they could eat. And then not only that, but then he does this. He let loose the east wind from the heavens. He led forth the south wind by his power. He rained meat down on them like dust, flying birds like sand on the seashore. He made them come down inside their camp all around their tents. These quail that come into the tent, into their campground, that they gives them meat to eat in addition to the bread of angels that they're having. But then notice verse number 30 starts with the word but. Means we're changing directions. It's not that, okay, God, you gave us the bread of angels, this manna, and you gave us meat. Therefore, we give you thanks, and therefore you have, boy, it's just tattooed in our brains now. We're never going to be ungrateful again. No, what does the next verse say? It says that they're craving something more. Their cravings are still there. They're still, even though God has given them, it says even about the manna, it's all the food that they could eat. Verse number 29, they had more than enough. And more than enough. And yet still, they're craving something else. I think that when we allow gratitude to fade in our present life, I think that there's two things that begin to happen that are dangerous things. The first one is a sense of discontentment. Again, the dictionary says it's a restless desire or craving for something that one does not have. Asaph uses that word 3 times in telling this story. We just read it in verses 29 and 30, and then it's back a little bit earlier in verse number 18. He talks about this craving for what they didn't have. Okay, God, you already did that, but what about? Yeah, okay, so you did this, but there's something else. There's this discontentment that's a restless desire or a craving for something that they didn't have. Solomon in Ecclesiastes describes it this way: enjoy what you have rather than desiring what you don't have. Just dreaming about nice things is meaningless. It's like chasing the wind. You have something, but discontentment says, yeah, but somebody else has something else. They have something more. They're craving something that I don't have. C.S. Lewis, in one of his Narnia books called The Magician's Nephew, covers this account of the witch who is in a lot of respects, following the biblical story, would be a picture of the devil. Wants power, wants immortality, wants all of these things that she thinks is going to put her on the pinnacle. And so she hears about a tree that can give her this power, this long life that she wants, but instead of following the plan that is laid out where you can enter into the gate, into this garden, she climbs the fence and she eats this fruit. And Aslan begins to describe what happened to her after that. He said, she has won her heart's desire. She has unwearying strength and endless days like a goddess. But length of days with an evil heart is only length of misery, and already she begins to know it. All get what they want. They do not always like it. They do not always like it. Discontentment is a restless desire or craving for something that one doesn't have. Or if we want to say it this way, it's counting up what you don't have instead of being grateful for what you do have. It's not saying, thank you, God, that you've given me this and this and this. Discontentment is saying, why didn't I have that and that and that? And that's exactly what happened to the Israelites. He brings them out of slavery. Well, that's great, God, but what about the bread? Well, here's the bread. Yeah, but what about the meat? I mean, just constantly craving something that they don't have. Their fading gratitude caused this discontentment to arise in their heart. But I think that there's, right on the heels of discontentment, I think that there is a sickly twin sister to discontentment that you usually see these two hand in hand, and that is entitlement. Not only saying, that's something that I don't have, but saying, I deserve that something that I don't have. It should be given to me. After all, look at, and we begin to compare ourselves, we begin to count up our list of, here's our qualifications, here's our reason why we should get it. Jesus talked about it, told a great story in Mark chapter 12 about some entitled people. It says, Jesus began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, he put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, built a watchtower, and then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and went away on a journey. Now notice, who did all of this? It's one man that he buys the land, he plants the land, he builds the fence to keep the crops protected, he builds the wine press, he builds the guard tower so that you can see if any animals or any bad guys are coming that are going to rob you or destroy some of your crops. He did all of that and then rented it to somebody else. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. He doesn't want it all. He says, just some of it. It's my vineyard. It's my land. I planted the crops. I built everything. So I just want some of it. But they seized that servant. They beat him. They sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them. They struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and that one they killed. He sent many others, some of whom they beat, others they killed. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, they will respect my son. And now listen to this entitlement. But the tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. I deserve this. This should be mine. This idea of discontentment is saying, that's not mine, and I wish it was. And entitlement, then right on the heels of that, says, yeah, you know what? I deserve to have this. This is the kind of mindset that has led to the downfall of many. In fact, I would say that there are some serious and potentially eternal consequences that can come if we don't get a handle, if we don't check discontented entitlement from our lives. Let me show you some immediate consequences. Jesus just told this story. The very next verse, he says this, what then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Asaph said almost the same thing in Psalm 78. Verse 31, God's anger rose against them. He put to death the sturdiest among them, cutting down the young men of Israel. There could be deadly consequences for our discontented entitlement. So the bottom line is, either we have to kill discontentment, or discontentment is going to kill us. We have to kill discontentment, or discontentment is going to kill us. Now, it's not complicated how we kill discontentment, but it is hard. It's not complicated, but it's hard. The reason why it's hard is that in our sinful flesh, we are just kind of naturally wired to want more and to feel like we're entitled to the more that's there. I mean, think about it. This is actually what turned Lucifer, the most beautiful of all of the angels, into Satan. He said, well, he didn't say, God, thank you for making me the way that you made me. He said, you know what? I should be God. People should be worshiping me. I should be on the throne. And that got him kicked out of heaven. So what do you think his strategy was with Adam and Eve? God gave them everything in the garden except for one tree. Well, what one tree did they think that they were entitled to eat from? That's what Satan whispered to them. Hey, come on. Did God really say that you're not supposed to eat from this tree? Planting those seeds of discontent. Come on. You know what? God really knows if you eat it, you're going to be like gods yourself. Don't you deserve that? You're entitled to this. It's naturally wired into our humanity, our sinful humanity, to feel discontentment and to feel like I'm owed that. How come they got that and I didn't? And we can even make it look, sometimes in churchy terms, we can say, hey God, hold on. Look at me. I mean, I read the Bible every day and I pray and I give money in the offering and I'm involved in things like hand to hand and other things. I go to church and here's my next door neighbor. This guy's a scoundrel. He's on like his 5th marriage and he cheats the IRS out of his taxes. He never goes to church. He never does anything nice for anybody. How come he's got a nicer house and a nicer car and goes on all these vacations? How come I should get that? Not him. I mean, I'm the one following the rules. He's not following. So we can dress it up that way. It's not complicated how we kill discontentment. It's just not easy either. You see that prefix at the beginning, D-I-S? Dis just means separated from. We've been separated from contentment. And so what we have to do is we have to separate the dis from the contentment. And we do that with the sword of gratitude. We do that with the sword of gratitude, which means that we do the hard work of choosing to look at the things that we have and being grateful for those. We do that by the hard work of saying, God hasn't given me this for some reason, I'm not going to question that. I'm going to be grateful for what he has given me. I think a lot of you probably know the story about Robinson Crusoe. He gets shipwrecked. He's on a desert island. And he had a difficult time when he first got on the island. He moaned and complained a lot. And he also, he prayed and said, God, why did this happen to me? What did I do wrong? Why am I stuck here? Because I think about some of my friends and they're living in some places. Daniel Defoe, that wrote the story Robinson Crusoe, has this great line. This is Robinson speaking. He says, I learned to look more upon the bright side of my condition and less upon the dark side, and to consider what I enjoyed rather than what I wanted. And this gave me sometimes such secret comforts that I cannot express them, and which I take notice of here to put those discontented people in mind of it, who cannot enjoy comfortably what God has given them, because they see and covet something that he has not given them. All our discontentments, listen to this, all our discontentments appear to me to spring from the want of thankfulness for what we have. All of our discontentments, he says, comes from the fact that we're just simply not being thankful for what we already have. Well, Daniel Defoe was a good Christian guy and was trying to tell the gospel story in the story of Robinson Crusoe. And I think that where he got this idea of what Robinson was saying there was probably what Paul said here in Philippians. I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me the strength. You see, contentment is learned not only in the good times, but in the bad times. Contentment is learned when appetites are satisfied and when appetites are thwarted. When God says yes and when God says no. We learn contentment by accepting what God is doing at that time and saying, as Paul said, I really believe this, that I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Why? Well, part of that is looking back with gratitude. Look what he's already done for me. Part of that is looking around now and saying, here's the blessings that I have. And then part of that is looking to the future and saying, if God has done that and this, he's going to be able to do. And we look to the future. In Luke's gospel, Jesus has a rather long teaching where he keeps on saying, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. Your Father's got this. Your Father's going to take care of this. And I like the way that Eugene Peterson, in the Message paraphrase, says it. These are the words of Jesus. What I'm trying to do here is get you to relax. Not be so preoccupied with getting so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way he works fuss over these things. But you know both God and how he works. Steep yourself in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Don't be afraid of missing out. You're my dearest friends. The Father wants to give you the very kingdom itself. He wants to give you the very kingdom itself. So he's not going to give you the things that are going to lead you away from the kingdom. Sometimes he says no to certain things so that you stay more reliant on him. God reality, God initiative, God provisions, more attentive to that. So the way that we swing the sword of gratitude and sever the from the discontentment, and not allow that discontentment or that entitlement to begin to grab a hold of our hearts and lead us down a path that could be deadly and maybe even eternal in its consequences, is we have to keep the reasons for our gratitude firmly in our mind. And I've so enjoyed over the last couple weeks just seeing all these different notes all over the place. I'm grateful for, I'm grateful for, I'm grateful for. I love walking into my house and finding that somebody had stopped by and put notes up in different places around my house that somebody's not even a family member, just they came into my house and put "I am grateful for" notes up all over the place. We've got some extra of those little Post-it notes, bright colors back there on the back table that are already stamped for you. It says "I am grateful for." Put these things where you're going to see them. If you're driving in your car and there's a near miss, put a note up there saying "I'm grateful for God's protection while I'm driving." Put it on the refrigerator, say "I'm grateful for the food that's inside of here." Put it on your furnace and say "I'm grateful that my furnace works." Put these notes up all over the place and say, "God, this is what you've given me. This is what you've blessed me with." Because when you see these constant reminders, it's going to help sever the from the discontentment. It's going to keep that from getting a hold of your heart saying, "Hey, how come I don't have that? I'm entitled to that. Why I should have it if somebody else should? Why not me?" It's going to sever the from the discontentment. Won't allow that discontentment or that entitlement to creep in and suck the life out of the enjoyment of the blessings that God has given you. Would you bow your heads with me? Just a quick word of prayer. Lord, thank you for the blessings that we see all around us. In fact, even as I have to take a breath to be able to form these words, I thank you for that breath. It's amazing to think about all of the processes that go on in the human body just so that we can take in one breath and exhale it back out. All of the nerves and muscles, the heart valves, the capillaries, down to the elements and that are flowing through our blood to allow for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. May we never even take that for granted, that we can take a breath. And you've provided that for us. God, would you help us to separate the discontentment from our hearts? It's hard work because our sinful flesh naturally craves more. Help us to sever that. Help us to slay those cravings with the sword of gratitude by keeping reminders around us of all the blessings that you've poured into our lives. May our focus be on you. May our focus be on the blessings that we have, not on the things that we don't have, not the wishing for something else, but the continual gratitude for the things that you've already given us. God, help us, as Paul said in Philippians, help us to learn what it is to be content in the good times and in the bad times. When you've given us much and when we don't have very much. When you say yes and when you say no. Help us to learn to trust you for all that we need and to be content in all that you are for us through your Son, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Amen.